The morning of my wife's funeral was colder than it should have been. Not a winter cold, but the kind that sinks into the bones. The kind that reminds you that something warm in your life has gone out forever. I stood beside her casket, staring at her still face, the face I had woken up next to for 48 years. Margaret always looked peaceful when she slept. But today, her peace felt wrong, artificial, like a mask someone had placed over the truth. People moved around me like shadows drifting through fog. Their murmurs rose and fell, blending with the organ notes humming faintly across the chapel. I heard condolences, soft, polite words, voices I barely recognized. None of it reached me. Nothing did except the scent of lilies, thick and suffocating. I rested my hand on the polished wood of the casket, because touching it made her feel closer, even if it was only an illusion. Margaret Hale had been many things in her life. A senior financial auditor, a woman with sharp intuition disguised beneath gentle calm. And she had been my center, my grounding weight in a noisy world. Losing her felt like the earth had shifted a few inches off its axis, and no one else noticed except me. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. I turned and found my daughter Laura standing stiffly near the aisle, her husband Trent beside her. Laura's eyes were red, but not from crying. She hadn't shed a single tear since the morning Margaret died. Instead, she had been restless, agitated, glancing constantly at her phone, at times when grief should have brought silence. Trent placed a hand on her arm as if steadying her, but the gesture felt rehearsed, almost impatient. They approached me with expressions that felt too controlled, too tight. "Dad," Laura said quietly, her voice just above a whisper. "We need to talk to you after the service. There are papers, important ones, papers you should sign sooner rather than later." "This is not the time," I murmured without lifting my eyes from Margaret's face. Laura exchanged a quick look with Trent. It was small but sharp, a flash of irritation. "We just want to help you, Dad," Trent added, his tone smooth but strangely hurried. Margaret would have wanted this taken care of. He reached for my shoulder, but I stepped slightly away without meaning to. I did not want to be touched by him. Not today. Not with the unease gnawing through my chest. Before I could respond, a firm hand grasped my elbow from the other side. I looked up into the eyes of Julian Crestwood, Margaret's employer for the last 17 years. Julian was a tall man, older but commanding, with a presence that made people step aside without thinking. His tie was slightly askew, as if he had rushed here straight from somewhere important. "Victor," he said softly, nodding toward the hallway. "A word, please." "Now. It will not wait," Laura bristled. "We were talking to him." Julian ignored her completely. His grip on my arm tightened just enough to convey urgency. I followed him out of the chapel and into the small corridor, where the scent of lilies faded into antiseptic air. Julian looked around to ensure we were alone. His usual composed expression was gone. In its place was something I had never seen on him. Fear. "I found something in Margaret's office," he said quietly. "Something she locked in her desk safe 3 weeks before she died. Something she left with instructions that it be opened only if the worst happened." My breath caught. "What do you mean, the worst?" Julian shook his head. "Not here. Not yet. Just listen. You must not sign anything. Do you understand me? Not one document, not even a receipt. Not until I show you what she left behind." My pulse hammered. Why are you saying this? What is going on? Julian exhaled slowly. Victor, he said, his eyes fixed on mine. I have reason to believe Margaret did not die the way everyone thinks she did. My stomach dropped. The hallway felt suddenly narrow, suffocating. What are you talking about? A sound rose from inside the chapel. Laura's voice calling softly for me. Julian leaned closer. Do not tell them I spoke to you, he whispered. You may think you know them, but you are not safe. Not tonight. Not until you see what Margaret discovered. The words punched through me like cold steel. My wife had died only days ago. She had left me with grief so heavy I could barely breathe. Now her employer was standing in a funeral hallway, telling me she had left behind secrets, and that my own daughter might not be safe to trust. I looked through the doorway at the silhouettes inside, at Laura and Trent waiting, their faces too alert, too controlled. Something in my life had shifted, and nothing would ever go back to the way it was. The house felt wrong the moment I stepped inside. Margaret used to joke that our home breathed with us, that every floorboard sigh, every settling groan of the roof beams was simply the house exhaling. But that night, it felt as if the walls were holding their breath. Laura and Trent followed behind me, their footsteps too quick, too controlled, as if escorting me somewhere I did not want to go. I hung my coat on the hook by the door, my hands trembling despite my efforts to keep them steady. The lights in the living room glowed too brightly. The air was too warm. It felt staged, like a room prepared not for mourning, but for negotiation. Dad, Laura said, in that practiced, gentle voice she used when she wanted something from me. We should sit. There is paperwork we need to finalize before tomorrow morning. It will make everything smoother. Smoother for whom? I wondered. Trent placed a blue folder on the coffee table with a sense of ceremony, then stepped back and folded his arms. The gesture reminded me of a loan officer, not a grieving son-in-law. I lowered myself into my recliner, the leather creaking softly. The blue folder felt like a living thing on the table between us. I looked at Laura, my daughter, my only child. Her face was pale, her eyes too bright, her lips pulled tight. She sat across from me, hands clasped, posture rigid. It struck me that she had spent more time talking about paperwork since her mother died than she had talking about her mother. What is that? I asked quietly. Just documents Mom intended for you to sign, she replied too quickly. Routine estate authorizations, power of attorney, handling the inheritance transfer. She always handled everything, Dad. You know that. We just want to help. I felt a shudder ripple through me. Margaret had handled our finances, yes. She had handled most things. But she had never once prepared something this important without discussing it with me. Never. I reached for the folder but did not open it. My fingers rested on the cover. The paper was warm from Trent's hands. I could feel their eyes on me like twin beams of expectation. I am tired, I murmured. My voice sounded small, even to myself. Let me rest tonight. Tomorrow we can sort this out. Trent's jaw tightened. His smile flickered and died. Of course, he forced out, but his tone cracked on the words. Laura leaned closer. Dad, we really think it is best if you sign them tonight. Everything is fragile right now. If anything happens to you, the process becomes complicated. Her voice trembled, but it was not grief. It was urgency. Everything Julie Crestwood had warned me about pressed against my ribs. "Not tonight," I repeated, stronger this time. I need one quiet night." The room shifted. The temperature dropped not physically, but emotionally. They exchanged a sharp look, quick and brittle, full of unspoken panic. "Fine, Dad," Laura said after a long moment. Her smile was thin as tissue. "We will talk in the morning." I nodded, pretending to be weary. I stood and walked toward my bedroom. I could feel their eyes boring into my back, their whispers starting the second I rounded the corner. "He cannot keep delaying. Tomorrow morning. No excuses. He signs. He is confused. We can use that." I closed my bedroom door with careful slowness, then pressed my back against it. My heart pounded so loudly, I feared they could hear it. I waited until the house was silent again before moving. I did not undress. I did not lie in bed. Instead, I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring into the dark. My mind churned with Julian's warning, with Margaret's lingering voice in my memories. Something was terribly wrong, and I was at the center of it. Hours passed. The house creaked. A distant refrigerator hum broke the silence. Then I heard footsteps above me. The garage apartment. Laura and Trent's living space. Their voices drifted faintly through the vents. "He is making this harder than it needs to be. He will sign. He has to. We do not have time for this." Their tone was sharp, urgent, edged with panic. I felt a cold certainty settle over me. I was not safe here. Not tonight. Not with them. At 2 a.m, when their voices faded and the house fell completely silent, I moved. I walked to the basement door and opened it slowly. The hinges did not squeak. Margaret had oiled them last spring. I flicked on a small flashlight, dimming it with my fingers. Boxes, old furniture, and tools cast long shadows. I shoved aside a stack of Margaret's gardening pots and found the small window near the floor, half hidden by a shelf. I unlocked it and pushed it open. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. It smelled like freedom or survival. I climbed through, my knees aching, my breath trembling. When my feet touched the ground outside, I paused and looked back at the house. The home Margaret and I had built together. The home that suddenly felt like a trap designed for my silence. I turned away and walked into the darkness, uncertain where I was heading. I only knew one thing with complete clarity. If I stayed, I would not see the morning. Dawn had barely begun its slow crawl across the horizon when I reached the tall glass building where Margaret had worked almost 2 decades. I had walked for hours through empty streets, letting cold air bite at my face, letting exhaustion push me forward. By the time I reached the lobby, my legs were trembling, and I felt older than I ever had in my life. The security guard took one look at me and seemed ready to call an ambulance, but then he recognized the name I gave him and immediately picked up the phone. Within minutes, Julian Crestwood appeared, his expression strained, as if he had not slept either. "Victor," he said quietly, "this way." I followed him through the silent lobby, past polished marble floors and tall indoor trees that Margaret used to admire whenever I waited to pick her up from work. Today, everything looked sharper, colder. We entered a private elevator and ascended quickly to the top floor. When the doors opened, a man stood waiting. He was in his 40s, with an unshaven face, tired eyes, and a calm, unmovable presence that felt both reassuring and unsettling. He extended his hand. "Mr. Hale, my name is Elias Monroe. I am a private investigator. I was working for Margaret." The words hit me like a blow to the chest. I stared at him, stunned. Working for Margaret? Why, she never told me anything. Elias exchanged a glance with Julian before answering. "She did not want to worry you until she had proof," he said gently. "She came to me about 3 months ago with concerns about her health and suspicious financial activity that she believed involved someone close to her. Someone close." The phrase echoed in my skull like thunder. We walked into Julian's office. The blinds were half drawn, letting thin strips of pale light cut across the room. On his desk sat a large black folder, a small sealed envelope, and a laptop waiting to be opened. Julian motioned for me to sit. "Victor," he began, his voice lower than before, "what I am about to show you is difficult. But I promised Margaret I would protect you if anything happened to her." A tremor ran through me. My hands felt numb. He opened the folder. Inside were pages of medical charts, lab results, and notes in a handwriting I recognized too well. Margaret's. "She suspected poisoning," Elias said quietly. "Slow, long-term, calculated. She noticed symptoms that did not match her medical history. Fatigue, nausea, dizziness, neuropathy. Her doctor thought it was age-related decline. Margaret did not believe that." I stared at the pages, my eyes burning. Margaret had been dying and fighting at the same time, trying to find the truth while protecting me. And she had done it alone. Elias placed a small flash drive on the desk. "And this," he said, "is why she came to me." Julian plugged it into the laptop and opened a video file. My throat tightened as the screen showed a familiar kitchen. My kitchen. The angle was from above, as if recorded from the vent hood. The timestamp in the corner told me it was taken 3 weeks before Margaret's death. Laura walked into the frame first, her robe swaying lightly. She looked over her shoulder twice before reaching into the pocket and pulling out a small, dark bottle. She unscrewed it and tapped something into the coffee maker. 3 brisk taps. She stirred it with the end of a spoon, then wiped the counter, humming softly, as if she were performing an ordinary morning routine. My blood turned to ice. The video ended. Julian clicked on another. This one was clearer, more recent. Trent entered the kitchen early in the morning the day after Margaret's funeral. He looked over his shoulder, then did the same thing Laura had done. Tap, tap, tap. A white powder dissolving into the water reservoir. My voice barely worked. "This is impossible." I raised her. I raised her. Elias did not look away. "Margaret found trace elements of arsenic and warfarin in her blood work," he said softly. "She tested herself secretly using a private lab she trusted. It confirmed exposure. She suspected both of them long before she died." Julian opened the sealed envelope and handed it to me. My hands shook as I pulled out a short letter in Margaret's handwriting. "Victor, if you are reading this, it means I failed to stop what was happening. Please listen to Julian. Please trust Elias. They will protect you when I no longer can. Do not confront Laura or Trent. They have reasons we still do not understand. But I fear they are desperate. And I fear you are next. Please survive. I love you. Margaret." My vision blurred. I pressed the letter to my chest and bent forward as grief split me open a second time. Elias spoke quietly. She wanted us to show you everything only when you were ready. She knew you would never suspect your own family, but she suspected them. She followed the money trail, the financial discrepancies. She discovered hidden accounts, forged signatures, withdrawals in your name. And when she confronted them, their plan escalated. I forced myself to breathe. My hands clenched into fists. Why? Why would they do this? Julian rested a hand on the desk. Because the money involved is enormous, Victor, and because they believed they were untouchable. But Margaret uncovered everything. The room spun around me. My daughter, my son-in-law, poisoning my wife, poisoning me. Elias leaned forward, his voice steady. We will not let them finish what they started. But Victor, from this moment on, everything you do must be part of a plan. Your life depends on it. For a long moment, I could not breathe. The walls of Julian's office felt as if they were slowly collapsing inward, pressing against my ribs. The truth moved through me like a cold tide, numbing everything in its path. Margaret had known. She had fought this alone. And now her death was no longer a mystery, but a wound inflicted by the very people I had welcomed into my home, into my life. Elias opened another folder, thicker than the first. The sound of the clasp releasing was sharp, final. Inside were printed financial statements, bank notifications, screenshots of emails, and a detailed timeline written in Elias's tidy handwriting. He slid the top page toward me. This, he said, is the reason they targeted Margaret, and the reason they are targeting you. I stared at the page. My name was everywhere, but the transactions were not mine. Withdrawals I had never made, signatures I had never written, credit lines I had never opened. It looked like the financial life of a stranger wearing my face. Elias continued speaking in a measured voice. Trent Foster is in severe financial trouble. He owes more than $1 million to private lenders, not banks. These are people who do not forgive unpaid debts. After the pandemic, he made some ambitious trading bets, then doubled down on risky offshore platforms. He lost everything, and then he used your accounts to stay afloat. I swallowed hard. I had trusted Trent with my laptop more than once, asking for help with software updates or online banking. It had never occurred to me that I was placing the keys to my life in the wrong hands. Margaret discovered some irregularities when she cross-checked unrelated audits, Julian added. She followed the numbers quietly, tracing them through shell accounts. It did not take her long to realize money was disappearing under your name. She confronted Laura first. That was when everything changed. I felt something inside me fracture. Laura knew. My daughter knew. Elias nodded, and she joined him. Not reluctantly, not out of fear. She saw a way out. A way to protect herself, a way to rise. Once they were both in it, they started planning how to keep Margaret from exposing them. But simply silencing her was not enough. They needed the money that her death would free. Her life insurance, her retirement benefits, your estate. The words estate and money spun in my head like poisoned arrows. Julian spoke again, his voice a low growl. Margaret was worth far more to them dead than alive. And you were the last obstacle between them and a large payout. That is why they pushed so aggressively for the estate documents. But that, Victor, that is not the worst part. I braced myself. Elias placed a second paper in front of me. A confession. It was written in my handwriting. except it was not mine. The document stated that I, Victor Hale, had killed my wife in a moment of emotional breakdown when I discovered she was embezzling money from her employer. It said I could not live with the guilt and planned to take my own life after signing away my assets to my grieving daughter Laura, who had been nothing but supportive in my final days. My hands trembled as I picked up the page. They meant for me to sign this. They meant to kill me and let the world think I murdered her. Yes, Elias said softly. The first pot of coffee they gave you after the funeral was heavily poisoned. When you spilled it, Laura signaled Trent to prepare a second cup. That second cup was meant to be the final dose. It was meant to end your life and complete the story they designed. Julian leaned forward. Victor, if you had signed that letter, your death would have been ruled a suicide. The insurance would pay out fully. Margaret's reputation would be destroyed, and Laura and Trent would inherit every last cent. The room swayed. I gripped the arms of the chair to steady myself. It felt as if my chest were splitting open. My daughter and her husband had not simply tried to kill me. They had planned to erase me, erase Margaret, rewrite our lives into a twisted lie that would grant them fortune and sympathy. The enormity of it drowned me. Why did Margaret not tell me sooner? I whispered. Why did she fight alone? Elias answered with quiet certainty. She knew you loved Laura too deeply to believe any of this without proof. She needed evidence strong enough to override a father's heart. She needed to protect you from your own trust. And she succeeded, Julian added. Her actions gave us the trail we needed. But now, Victor, the next steps are yours. Elias leaned forward, his voice calm but ironclad. You cannot confront them. You cannot accuse them. If you do, you will be dead before we can intervene. Your only path to survival is to make them think you are broken, confused, compliant. You must be the man they believe they can control. And then we catch them in the act. The weight of the truth pressed down on me, crushing and clarifying all at once. Tell me what I have to do, I said. Elias nodded slowly. We are going to use their plan against them. Tomorrow morning, you will go home, and you will give them exactly what they want to see. I breathed in, shaky but resolute. For Margaret, I said, for the truth. And for the first time since she died, I felt the faintest spark of purpose return to my chest. The sun had barely started bleeding pale light across the sky when Julian dropped me 2 blocks away from my home. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. I stood there for a moment, hands shoved into the pockets of my old coat, staring down the familiar street that suddenly felt like a hunting ground. My house, once a sanctuary, now looked like a stage, a place where I would need to perform grief, confusion, and surrender with absolute conviction. Elias's instructions echoed through my mind. Be broken, be unsure, be small. Let them believe they have won. Everything depended on the performance. I walked the last stretch slowly, shuffling my feet, forcing a tremor into my hands, letting exhaustion from the sleepless night settle visibly into my shoulders. I did not need to fake much. The weight of betrayal had hollowed me out enough. As I stepped onto the walkway, the front door swung open. Laura stood there, her expression somewhere between anger and fear. Trent loomed behind her, tense, eyes sharp, watching for any sign that I had slipped out of their grasp permanently. "Dad!" Laura snapped. "Where have you been? Do you have any idea how worried we were?" Her voice was wrong, too charged, too brittle. I lifted my face toward her slowly, blinking as if waking from a bad dream. I let my lips tremble. I just walked, I murmured. I could not be here last night. Everything reminded me of her. I just needed air. I am sorry. I did not mean to frighten you. Trent stepped forward, his tone softening unnaturally. You should have called us. You cannot do this, Victor. Not now. I nodded, letting my gaze fall to the floor. I know. I know. I am not thinking clearly. I just feel lost. They exchanged a triumphant glance. They believed me. The weight in my chest tightened, but I forced myself to keep the act alive. I walked inside slowly. The house felt different, colder, as if the walls themselves recoiled from what they now knew about its inhabitants. Laura guided me to the living room and sat beside me, clutching my hands with theatrical tenderness. "Dad," she whispered, "we are here for you. We want to make things easier." I stared at the blue folder on the coffee table, the forged confession disguised as harmless papers. I swallowed hard. "You were right," I said softly. "I cannot do this alone. I think maybe signing those papers is the best thing." Their relief was instant and visible. Laura exhaled sharply, her shoulders sinking. Trent's posture eased. It was as if my surrender had untied a knot they had been strangling on. I looked up at them with watery eyes. "But first, I want one last dinner tonight. Just us. For Margaret. To remember her the way she deserved." Laura hesitated, just for a moment, suspicion flickering. But the desire to contain me, to secure their victory, overrode it. "Of course, Dad. That is a beautiful idea." I smiled weakly. Her favorite meal, herb roasted chicken with fresh rosemary, and that wine from our anniversary, the one from that specialty market. I want it to be perfect." Trent's jaw twitched. The market was far, too far. "Dad, we have plenty of rosemary here." "No," I insisted gently. She always hated dried herbs. "It has to be the fresh kind. Please, I want to do this right." Reluctance flickered between them, but then the logic settled. Humor the grieving old man. Keep him calm. Let him sign tomorrow. Keep him steady until then. Laura forced a smile. "All right. We can go now. Together." She said the last word like a warning, ensuring I did not leave her sight again. I shuffled toward the door, letting Trent support my elbow. They steered me outside, guiding me into their sleek black SUV. I sat in the back like a child, quiet and obedient. The car pulled off our street and rounded the corner. 2 cars behind us, a plain gray sedan followed at a polite distance. I recognized it instantly as Elias's team. I did not dare look back. The grocery trip felt like an eternity. I walked slowly through every aisle, picking up bottles of wine only to set them back down. I asked clerks for help. I tested rosemary sprigs as if choosing diamonds. Laura sighed loudly with each step. Trent's patience frayed like a tight rope. But they did not rush me. Not fully. They needed me calm, pliable, willing. By the time we finally purchased the ingredients, nearly 2 hours had passed. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. The signal. The house was wired. We drove back in silence. Trent turned into the driveway, oblivious to the invisible trap now woven through the walls of my home. When I stepped through the door, the living room lights glimmered softly across the surfaces. Everything looked unchanged. but I felt the eyes of the tiny cameras hidden in the smoke detector, the vent hood, and the digital clock. This time, I was not alone in this house. This time, the walls were watching them. Evening settled slowly over the house, stretching long shadows across the wooden floors, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was coming. I stayed in my recliner, forcing my breaths to remain shallow and uneven, forcing my shoulders to sag. I played the role of a man dissolving under the weight of grief. Laura drifted between the kitchen and the dining room, humming softly, a tune Margaret used to hum without thinking. Hearing it now felt like a blade turning in my chest. Trent moved with sharper movements, checking his phone repeatedly, glancing toward me as if afraid I might vanish again. The scent of roasting chicken thickened the air, rich with rosemary and lemon, a cruel imitation of the meals Margaret had loved to prepare on quiet Sunday afternoons. I allowed the nostalgia to show in my eyes, letting tears well but not fall. Every piece of this performance mattered. I had to look lost, fragile, desperate for comfort, too weak to question anything. When Laura finally called out that dinner was ready, I rose slowly, letting Trent step toward me to offer support I pretended to need. We walked toward the dining room. The table was set with Margaret's best china, the set she kept locked away except for special occasions. Seeing it arranged now, under the pretense of honoring her, made my throat tighten with something raw and dangerous. The three of us sat, forming a triangle of false warmth around a table that had once held real laughter. Laura served me first, placing a carefully arranged portion of chicken, potatoes, and greens on my plate. Trent poured wine into my glass with exaggerated care. Everything about them was too gentle, too attentive. It was the tenderness of hunters coaxing an animal closer to the snare. I tasted nothing. My fork scraped against porcelain as I shifted pieces of food around my plate. I told stories Elias had told me to tell, old memories, soft ones. The days when Laura was a little girl running barefoot across the yard, Margaret laughing as she chased her. The first summer vacation we took together, the night I proposed under a cracked old street lamp. I let my voice hitch at the right moments. I let warmth edge into my words like an old man clinging to what is gone. Laura's eyes softened as she listened. Genuine nostalgia flickered across her face before tightening into calculation again. Trent's face, however, remained still, unreadable, his eyes glinting with something like impatience. When enough time had passed, I set my fork down, my hand trembling naturally from exhaustion. I looked at Trent, letting my voice break in the way Elias instructed. "Son," I whispered, "I am so tired. Would you mind making me a cup of coffee? Just the way Margaret used to." The room shifted. Laura's breath caught. Trent straightened, surprise then delight flashing through his eyes. He nodded slowly. "Of course. Anything you want." He stood and walked to the kitchen. Laura followed him halfway before stopping, choosing to lean casually against the counter where she had a clear view of both me and the coffee maker. The soft hum of the machine switching on filled the quiet like a distant storm warning. I watched through lowered lashes as Trent took out a mug, then reached discreetly into his pocket. The dark glass vial appeared in his hand, small and unremarkable, yet capable of ending a life in seconds. He unscrewed the cap and tapped the powder into the reservoir. Tap, 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 white dust drifted like snow into the water. Laura was smiling. Trent stirred the mixture with a long spoon, wiped the rim clean, and pressed the brew button. The machine rumbled. Steam curled upward in lazy coils, carrying the faint scent of roasted beans. Laura whispered, almost tenderly, "He needs this. It will help him sleep." The coffee finished brewing. Trent poured it into my favorite ceramic mug, the one Margaret had painted little blue flowers on years ago. He carried it to the table with reverence. "Here you go, Dad. Drink while it's hot. It will settle your nerves." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment Elias had warned me about. I reached out with shaking fingers, lifted the mug halfway to my lips, and then let my hand collapse at the wrist. The mug crashed onto the table, spilling scalding liquid over the lace tablecloth and pooling across the wood. I flinched, letting a high, frightened sound escape my throat. "I am so sorry," I gasped, wiping uselessly at the spill. My hands shook. "I cannot hold anything today. I ruined it." For a moment, neither of them moved. Laura's face twisted in pure fury, quickly masked by a trembling smile. Trent stared at the spilled coffee as if watching a treasure drain away. "It is fine, Dad," Trent said through clenched teeth. "I will make you another." He stood abruptly and returned to the kitchen. Laura followed this time, whispering harshly under her breath. She thought I could not hear her, but I heard every word. "He is slipping. Just finish it. Just finish it tonight." The second mug was prepared the same way. The cameras caught everything. The angles were perfect. The evidence airtight. When Trent set the second poisoned cup on the counter to cool slightly, I knew the trap was now fully loaded. All I had to do was survive the next few minutes, and tomorrow morning, the truth would burn brighter than any lie they had ever told. Night settled over the house like a velvet curtain, heavy and suffocating. I sat in my recliner long after the table had been cleared, pretending to drift in and out of exhausted half-sleep. In reality, every nerve in my body strained to remain alert. The cameras hidden throughout the kitchen and dining room recorded everything, sending the feed directly to Elias's team stationed nearby. I imagined them watching, waiting for the moment when the final act of treachery would be undeniable. Laura and Trent retreated upstairs to whisper urgently behind closed doors. Their steps echoed through the old beams of the house, their voices sharp and clipped, tension carrying in every syllable. They were impatient now. The second poisoned cup of coffee still waited on the counter, cooling beside the mug Margaret had once loved. At last, their footsteps descended the stairs. Laura entered first, her expression carefully arranged into concern, though the edges of her eyes flickered with something colder. Trent followed, carrying the blue folder the way a priest might carry a scripture. My confession, my supposed admission of guilt, a masterpiece of forgery and malice. "Dad," Laura said softly, kneeling beside my chair, "you must be so tired. Why do you not come to the table for a moment? There are only a few things we need to go over before you get some rest." I lifted my gaze slowly, letting confusion cloud my expression. My voice trembled. I do not know if I can focus tonight." "Yes, you can," she insisted, squeezing my arm a little too tightly. "It will only take a minute." I rose unsteadily, leaning heavily on the armrest. Trent stepped forward to take my elbow as if guiding a frail patient. I allowed it, though the touch made my stomach twist. The dining table was cleared now except for the folder and the pen laid perfectly parallel beside it. They had even straightened the tablecloth where the poisonous coffee had spilled. Laura gestured toward the chair at the head of the table. Sit, Dad. Everything is ready. I sat slowly, deliberately. My hands rested on the edge of the table, trembling just enough to keep their guard down. Trent opened the folder, revealing the forged pages. He turned them toward me. All you need to do is sign here, he said, pointing to the first tabbed line. Then everything will be settled, and we can take care of the rest. I let my eyes skim the first lines without focus, as if my mind were too clouded to comprehend. The words written in my supposed voice stared back at me, cold and cruel. I confess, I cannot bear the guilt of what I have done. I killed my wife. I swallowed, forcing my voice to quiver. I do not remember writing this. Trent's jaw tightened. We talked about this, Victor. You said you wanted to take responsibility, that you could not live with what happened to Margaret. Laura leaned in, her tone falsely soft. Dad, grief can cloud memory. You told me yourself you needed to clear your conscience. Signing this will free you. It will free all of us. Her words revealed more than she realized. I lifted the pen. My hand hovered above the paper. They leaned forward, breath held. I felt the weight of the hidden cameras watching, the silent audience beyond the walls. I lowered the pen, and then I set it down. Before I sign, I said quietly, there is something you should know. The air thickened instantly. Trent stiffened. Laura blinked, her smile faltering. No. What? She asked cautiously. I looked up slowly. For the first time that night, I let the mask slip. The tremble left my hands. My voice no longer wavered. Margaret knew, I said. She knew everything. She knew about the missing money. She knew about the debts. She knew who was using my name. She knew who was poisoning her. Laura's face froze in mid-expression. Color drained from her cheeks. Trent's mouth twitched, a pulse jumping in his jaw. Dad, Laura whispered, her voice now thin and sharp. You are confused. That is not... She knew it was both of you. Silence shattered the room. Not a breath, not a movement. Then Laura's carefully crafted expression cracked. Her hands trembled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Trent moved first. Not toward me, toward the folder. He lunged forward abruptly, reaching for the papers as if tearing them away could undo my words, undo the truth. That was the signal. Now, I said loudly, the words slicing through the room like a blade. The house erupted. The front and back doors burst inward at the same moment. Boots pounded against hardwood. Voices thundered. Police, do not move. Hands where we can see them. Laura screamed, a high, piercing sound filled with panic. Trent spun around, caught between flight and denial, but two officers were already on him, forcing him to the floor. His face hit the wooden planks with a dull thud. Laura stumbled backward, hitting the china cabinet. Her hands flew to her head as she sobbed hysterically. It was him. It was him. He made me. He told me. I did not know. I thought it was vitamins. Her words dissolved into broken cries. Elias entered the room behind the officers, calm, focused, relentless. He walked straight into the kitchen. A moment later he returned, holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside was the second mug. the one Trent had prepared. "Enough poison to kill you twice over," he said loud enough for both of them to hear. Trent lifted his head just slightly. His eyes locked onto mine, no remorse, only a burning hatred that sent a chill through my bones. "You should have died quietly," he hissed, but I did not look away. "No," I said, my voice steady. "I lived, and she saved me." As Laura and Trent were dragged out of the house in handcuffs, screaming and thrashing, I felt something inside me settle. The truth had won its battle, but the war inside my heart was just beginning. The courtroom felt colder than any place I had ever been, not because of the temperature, but because of the weight of everything that had happened inside those four walls. 6 months had passed since the night Laura and Trent were arrested. 6 months of autopsies, forensic analyses, interrogations, and endless legal procedures. 6 months in which I woke up each morning in the luxury suite Julian had secured for me staring at a skyline that held no meaning. 6 months of grieving the woman I loved and the daughter I had already lost long before the truth surfaced. And now, here we all were. Reporters crowded the steps of the courthouse outside, their voices muffled through the thick glass. Inside, benches were packed with people drawn by morbid curiosity, fascinated by the story of a family shattered by greed. Julian sat beside me, his presence steady. Elias stood near the prosecution's table, his expression firm, unreadable. Then the guards brought them in. Laura walked first, thinner than I had ever seen her, her once meticulously styled hair now dull and pulled back without care. She scanned the room until her eyes found mine. Something flickered there. Fear, anger, shame, or perhaps the hollow absence of all three. Behind her, Trent entered in chains, his expression carved from stone. His eyes remained cold, void of remorse. He had always been good at wearing masks. Now he wore none. When the judge finally called the room to order, the silence was so complete it seemed to swallow the air. The prosecution rose. "Your Honor, the state calls Victor Hale to the stand." A murmur moved through the audience as I walked forward. I could feel Trent's gaze boring into me, but I refused to meet his eyes. I placed my hand on the Bible, repeated the oath, and sat. Nina Ramirez stepped forward, her voice even. "Mr. Hale, please tell the court, in your own words, what happened on the morning of March 10th. I exhaled, steadying myself, and then I spoke. I told them about the first cup of coffee, the one I had spilled. I told them about Trent preparing the second. I told them about the humming sound of the coffee machine, the vial Laura pretended I never saw, the cold precision with which they carried out every step. The jury listened without blinking, their horror growing with each detail. Then Nina asked, "What did you do when they asked you to sign the documents?" I lifted my eyes toward the defense table. I told them Margaret knew, and in that moment, they showed the truth you see today. When I finished, the prosecution moved to admit the video footage into evidence. Gasps filled the courtroom as the screen lit up, revealing my kitchen, the mug, the vial, their hands, their faces, their whispered words. Each frame dismantled the lies their lawyers had tried to build. When the video ended, the room was silent enough to hear a heartbeat. Then the defense tried. Laura's attorney approached, smoothing his tie dramatically. "Mr. Hale, would you agree that you were grieving, that in such a state, memories might be unreliable?" Is it possible that what you perceived as poison was nothing more than a vitamin supplement prepared by caring children? I turned slowly toward him. My wife was murdered. I was nearly murdered. And what they prepared was not care. The lab reports do not lie. The cameras do not lie. My daughter and her husband tried to kill me for money. The attorney faltered. He knew he was fighting a battle already lost. When closing arguments ended, the judge dismissed the jury to deliberate. They returned in 40 minutes. 40 minutes to decide the fate of two people who had spent months crafting a plan so elaborate, so merciless, they believed no one could ever unravel it. The courtroom stood as the foreperson rose. On the charge of murder in the first degree of Margaret Hale, how do you find? Guilty. Laura collapsed into tears, her entire body shaking. Trent stared forward, jaw tight, eyes empty. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree of Victor Hale, how do you find? Guilty. The room vibrated with whispers. A reporter in the back gasped audibly. On the charge of conspiracy to commit fraud and theft of assets, how do you find? Guilty. The judge thanked the jury. Then he lifted his gavel, but before he sentenced them, he looked directly at the defendants. You did not simply try to take a life, he said. You attempted to erase the truth, rewrite a family, and destroy the legacy of an innocent woman. The cruelty shown in this case defies comprehension. He turned his gaze toward me. Mr. Hale, your courage in facing the darkest betrayal imaginable has allowed justice to prevail. Then he delivered the sentence. Laura Bennett and Trent Bennett, for these crimes, this court sentences you each to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Laura screamed, not a cry, a scream that tore the air apart. Trent did not move. He simply stared at me, expression cold as steel, hatred pulsing beneath the surface. As guards pulled them away, Laura sobbed my name. Trent whispered something I could not hear, or would not allow myself to hear. I walked out of the courthouse into the sunlight, Julian beside me. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. I paused at the top of the steps, breathing in air that finally felt free. It was over. The truth had won. Margaret had won. But the lesson left behind was heavy and permanent. Sometimes the deepest betrayals come not from enemies, but from those we love. Blind trust can become a weapon placed in the wrong hands. And even the gentlest hearts can carry shadows we never imagined. If this story teaches anything, it is this. Love deserves honesty. Loyalty deserves loyalty in return. And when darkness hides behind familiar faces, the truth, no matter how painful, is the only path that can save a life.